Pacific Rise is a $10 million Australian government DFAT-funded initiative managed by Tetra Tech International Development that ran from November 2016 to July 2021 to connect Pacific social enterprises with private investment and to fund technical support to businesses to become investment ready.
Quinped's products started off in 2018 in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, out from a personal challenge when I was basically unemployed, started to reach out to communities, and I could see the need, especially for those unemployed that have no way to purchase pads every month.
The term Calico Stay Free was coined in 2016 when we first started a research, and during that time we've discovered that there is a need for Solomon Islands in terms of the product that is necessary for women and girls to have access to so that we can manage our menstruation in a much more dignified way.
Mana Kea was founded in May 2018 by myself and my co-founder to address the social, cultural, health and environmental challenges in which we're associated with menstruation for Samoa.
Aminem blomi miracle trap, me live low and village low evate. Me with the husband blomi me tulana look at them mama's life and what to.
Me go walk low New Zealand low 2011, 12, 13, 14 then me custom one friend. And then he can found that Mama's life.
I was visiting Vanuatu for a small project in a business that I was running in New Zealand that involved Vanuatu products. Cyclone Pam had happened, and I said to Mary, what do women do in times of natural disaster like this? What do you use for your menstruation? And that is exactly where the conversation started.
Started in 2015, we will run 2021.
Pacific Rise has a gender lens on investment focus, which means from the outset we were looking for investments that could have a significant impact on women and girls in the Pacific.
Criterion Institute is a global think tank. We work on expanding who sees themselves as able to use finance as a tool for social change. And one of our most important partnerships in our 20 years has been with Pacific Rise, in thinking about how to rethink power dynamics in how investment capital moves in the Pacific and how can we disrupt power dynamics.
In 2017, DFAT and partners IWDA, Burnett Institute and WaterAid completed groundbreaking research into the state of menstrual health in the Pacific in a report called The Last Taboo. The research highlighted challenges that Pacific women and girls face in managing menstruation. One of the key recommendations was to improve availability, affordability and access to quality commercial menstrual hygiene products, particularly in remote and rural areas. In September 2018, Pacific Rise partnered with the Criterion Institute and Menstrual Health Hub to facilitate a 4-day workshop in Melbourne, Australia. The workshop brought together a diverse range of social and business actors focused on improving menstrual health management in the Asia-Pacific region to understand and overcome inefficiencies and obstacles in the menstrual health market.
Issues that me bring him go there, him same to or some other Pacific island.
Everyone me issue bulgata lo side lo how no me play service so symbol paprik lo kolo lo one country pro me vela.
Other freights too, him sa high for good.
These two issues would really inhibit the growth of our businesses or the terms in which they existed.
So me try hard na for find out how na for bring him in fabric lo countries lo me fala but lo cheaper way.
Having to share the similar challenge was actually good because then we were able to identify what could work for us in terms of addressing this.
This helped us understand that the enterprises were sound. The issue was the supply chain was not serving them. This raised an opportunity for Pacific Rise to develop an innovative finance solution to reduce the cost of key fabrics and ultimately expand access to reusable products for managing menstruation in the Pacific. The first recommendation from the Melbourne workshop was that this vehicle needed to be Pacific-led, and the Pacific enterprises were the ones driving this deal. So Pacific Rise set up an advisory board, including the Pacific Menstrual Health enterprises and businesses, to provide ongoing support throughout the design and implementation.
On the advisory board, we were to provide the context of the region in order for the TFV to be effective.
It's such an incredible opportunity for me to contribute my ideas and my thinking around system and structures that will help support social enterprises like Kaleka Stay Free Solomons.
Now that we had the idea, we needed to see if there was an organisation that could design and run the trade finance vehicle.
We were able, because of the structures of Pacific Rise, to offer a grant to see could somebody come in and build that trade finance vehicle.
The relationship between Red Hat Impact and Lotus Impact was really formed by representatives from both our organisations going to a workshop in Sydney, which was being facilitated by Pacific Rise and Criterion. And that workshop was really around exploring, given what the women had identified as being the thing they wanted to solve through trade finance, our role was to come to that workshop and come up with some ideas about how trade finance could be set up to meet those needs.
During that meeting in Sydney, the team finalised the structures for us to get the first set of fabrics into our respective countries.
Red Hat Impact's role around setting up and running the trade finance vehicle was essentially a technical role. One of the features of the trade finance vehicle was using it as a way of bringing private investment towards trade finance in the Pacific for menstrual health.
Alongside Red Hat Impact, Lotus has brought great expertise around monitoring, evaluation and learning, and excellent relationships with actors all across the Asia Pacific region.
Doing this trade finance vehicle, what it really is all about is just this way of doing trade that allows these women entrepreneurs to do their thing. And it really just comes down to facilitating their ability to trade and buy and sell at a much more efficient level.
To build the TFE, we determined 4 design principles from everything we had heard in Melbourne. We're not working to fix the enterprises because they don't need fixing. This is a supply chain problem. The producers shouldn't bear the risk of the financing. Enterprises should be strengthened by the vehicle, but growth isn't the motivation. And producers are largely informal enterprises and shouldn't have to formalise in order to participate. Trade finance sits between the buyer and the seller. The funds from the investors provide upfront payment to the seller, the fabric producer, and allows the buyer, the enterprises, to only pay for the goods once they receive them. So for our TFE, investors have provided a loan at a fixed 5% return. This first investment was for US $50,000 from 15 investors. The TFE uses those funds to purchase the required fabric and arranges shipping to a hub. Enterprises enter into a simple supply agreement with the TFE and submit their fabric order. Then we arrange shipping to the enterprise using a freight forwarding service. Enterprises then pay for the materials on an agreed time frame, and the TFE retains a lien over the stock until it's paid for. The price per metre covers all of the costs of operation, and this repays the investors. And then it all starts again. As the demand for the TFE grows, we can recruit more investors or seek larger buy-ins from existing investors.
The first big excitement was when we were able to take the trade finance vehicle concept to a group of investors that had been assembled together to hear about it and to think about investing in it. And we presented the trade finance vehicle to these investors.
It was the simplicity of the idea and that it was truly grounded in the needs of the community that lit up the investors.
And within 24 hours, we had the money that we required from those investors.
Emails came immediately afterwards saying, we're in, we're in, we're in, we're in, we're in, we're in, we're in. This is incredible.
That was a really big moment for the project overall because it meant that we could now start operating. We could now start getting into the process of purchasing materials and thinking about orders from enterprises and serving those orders. The second big moment was when we started negotiating and working really closely with the enterprises on thinking about what their needs for material might be, starting to explore the sorts of prices they currently would pay and how we could potentially match or better those prices. Working through that process of negotiating, educating and learning together was really quite special. And that all led to that moment though where we were ready to push the go button on our first orders.
When the enterprises submitted their first orders through the trade finance vehicle, it was really exciting to see all of the work around forecasting, supply chain and investment had paid off. It was fantastic. It made it all worthwhile.
I can remember when we sent our first order to Queen Pads in Papua New Guinea, and also the first order we sent to Calico Stay Free in Solomon Islands. The thing that really struck home for us was how excited the women who produced these products were when they received that material.
The only thing better than the enterprises submitting their first orders was seeing those materials actually land with them in country.
So the fabric reached us in Port Moresby, and it was the first time we were going to actually see what a pool fabric looks like or what a zob fabric looks like. So I brought it over and they were so excited. They said, okay, listen, we're not gonna open this yet. Let's pray and say thank you to God. And I was so grateful. So then after praying, they said, okay, let's open it. And we all went and had a feel and wow, so this is what it is. Okay, cool. So they're like, so we're gonna start using this? And I said, yes, we're gonna start using it. So since then, I believe this has also sort of boosted the morale of the team members. They were also confident in themselves and the materials they were using to produce pads. And so it was a really good feeling. We couldn't have got this without the trade finance vehicle and everyone involved in it, because I don't know what to say.
It was the most incredible feeling ever. When we received that particular shipment, it's like a breath of fresh air. We all felt exuberant and we're so excited. We think about all the products that we will be producing. You can see from our team's faces, people were just smiling and excited. And for me personally, I felt like a huge burden has been lifted off from my shoulder.
The TFV can support growth for those that are looking to scale, or perhaps fund other initiatives like education programs or product development, or simply reduce cost and logistical pressures facing those enterprises. The key is that the problem lies in the supply chain, and that's what the TFV is aiming to solve. The TFV is designed to benefit enterprises in a number of ways. It gives them access to a stable, predictable supply of lower-cost specialty materials that are otherwise difficult to access in the Pacific. It doesn't require a debt contract or for enterprises to take on finance. This means that both formal and informal enterprises can participate. Previously, enterprises would pay high prices and have to pay up front for fabric that they might not receive until months later. But now, under the TFV, with flexible payment terms of 30 or 60 days, enterprises can access and even use the fabrics before they're required to pay, which stabilises their cash flows and the supply of their input materials. The TFV also does the legwork in negotiating and securing supply, which reduces the workload and stress of business owners. Aggregating the demand of several enterprises not only reduces the cost per metre, but it gives enterprises of any size access to competitive prices without the burden of having to order huge volumes usually required for the minimum ordered quantities from wholesalers. Production delays because of an inability to source fabric are a thing of the past. These combined benefits will increase the production and distribution of reusable menstrual pads in the Pacific, which will improve access to affordable and appropriate products to manage menstruation safely and with dignity.
When COVID-19 came along, it came quite suddenly.
COVID-19 accelerated the need for the trade finance vehicle. It closed down the main way that most businesses source their fabric, through suitcase trade.
We heavily rely on suitcase trade. Getting the fabrics into the country, it was incredibly difficult for us.
And a number of the enterprises were able to pivot from making reusable menstrual pads to making non-hospital grade face masks and coverings. This meant they needed access to fabrics locally and quickly. However, it also meant that the team designing the vehicle needed to develop relationships with the enterprises online rather than in person. And this highlighted the importance of having an enterprise-led advisory board. board.
What Pacific Rise set up by us all going on to Zoom calls worked really, really well.
A lot of remote interaction, but we were really confident that we could pivot this project onto more remote working and not lose momentum. There's been so much that we've been learning and are still learning through this project. What was great from the perspective of Red Hat Impact was how embracing and empowering it was to be able to step into this group and build relationships directly to the women who run the enterprises we support and the other women across the network of partnerships that were leading the trade finance vehicle work.
Working with Criterion, the Lotus Impact team and the Red Hat Impact, I think that for me was one of the benefits in terms of learning. And based on all these different experiences, it helps to build the model really and to make this model functional in a specific context.
It's a demonstration that a couple things that are really important are possible. One is that we can look at menstrual health as a market and intervene not just at individual enterprises, but make an ecosystem, a market, more effective. And that is important for how we continue to build out investing, innovative finance, moving to responding to issues of menstrual health. It's a critically important piece to say we're not just building one enterprise at a time, but that we're shifting how the market works so we can affect more people through that kind of intervention. The second piece is that we've demonstrated a different approach to building financial vehicles that gives voice to people who aren't usually the designers. The menstrual health enterprises, they designed this vehicle. They named what the problem was and worked together to name what the solution could be.
The Pacific enterprises and the Pacific people are at the center. It's something I really congratulate the donors as well as all of us enterprises that have participated in this work.
Sharing what we know, what we've experienced, and just being able to serve, that's what I've learned so far.
When you look at the set of conditions for the TFV across the Pacific, I think they're just really tough problems to solve. But what we have done is shown that things can be done. And that lesson in terms of sharing it, that sharing hopefully will allow others working on these important cases as well. So that kind of cross-pollination or fertilization of ideas, I think, is huge in the field of impact investing. Sorely needs it.
We can shift the power dynamic of whose knowledge, whose voice, whose interest matters in innovative finance. And if we don't do more of that, we won't get to the kind of development outcomes that we can imagine from innovative finance.
We've been calling this first version Trade Finance Vehicle 1.0 because we've always had in mind that we'll be moving to the next version of it as soon as we can. And everything that we're doing at the moment in terms of interpreting our lessons learned is thinking about what we need to change and improve to set up a really good platform for scaling the trade finance vehicle.
I think the next step is replication. Either A, in that order of goods, scale up, if you will, of that order. Another way of replication here is adding in an additional market. Then you've got possibilities of a larger volumes per order. And then by logic, then the impact, could be greater as well.
The ongoing support from the trade finance vehicle means that Samoan women and Pacific women as a whole now have access to products that are safe, not just for her as a menstruating individual, her family in which she belongs to, but the environment that they coexist in. The enabling environment from the TFV will provide a quantum leap for existing enterprises in terms of expansion, but also for new emerging enterprises in which will fruit from this work.
The trade finance vehicle needs to continue because the market problem that it's working on is going to be there for the long term unless this kind of intervention is available. It's simply impossible for these enterprises to get to their growth without being supported in this kind of way.
We couldn't have reached this level without, the support of everyone involved from the beginning, and We'd like to increase our production so we are able to reach many women and girls with these products. And we cannot continue doing that without the support.
The future is really uncertain, but there is hope with the support that we've got from the trade finance vehicle. It will help to boost our production levels and we will meet the market demand. That's the future that we're looking at, where girls and women are happy and confident and have care about their own menstrual health.
I'm excited to see what the long-term outcomes of the trade finance vehicle will be and how it can impact the Pacific over the next 10, 20 years. It can be around for a very long time. But even more importantly, we're already starting to name a different kind of thing that needs to be measured, which is about process. And the menstrual health vehicle was a change in the how. It changed the power dynamics. We're not going to shift the long-term, we're not going to get to the long-term gender equity outcomes that we're seeking because we're not changing the power dynamics. And this at its core was an experiment, a demonstration that we can shift those power dynamics, shift whose voices and whose terms and whose problems matter in order to solve a problem using finance.
The power of the menstrual health trade finance vehicle is in the demand-led financial innovation, where Pacific small businesses, all from different countries, work together to generate the scale and influence to change the course of fabric shipments, usually sent to larger markets in Australia or New Zealand, but to be sent to the Pacific. This was also of interest to the investors, and in particular the growing community of gender-lens investors who were looking for a way to affordably invest in the region. This will also have direct benefit for the users, women and girls in the Pacific who need to access safe and affordable and locally produced menstrual products. They're really doing something amazing.